When I walked into the community center carrying my grandmother's famous lemon cake, my neighbor Barbara took one look at the dish and said, "Old ladies never know how to cook anything decent anymore." The words sliced through me like broken glass. Old ladies. I stood there in the doorway, the ceramic dish suddenly feeling like it weighed 100 pounds in my trembling hands. And I watched as Barbara turned to the younger women clustered around the refreshment table, their laughter echoing off the walls like tiny hammers against my chest. Old ladies never know how to cook anything decent anymore. I was 53 years old. I had been baking since I was 7, learning at my grandmother's elbow in her warm kitchen that always smelled like vanilla and butter. This cake, this specific lemon cake with its delicate crumb and tangy glaze, had won 3 blue ribbons at the county fair. I had made it for birthdays, weddings, christenings, and funerals. I had made it when my husband left me for his 20-year-old dental hygienist 4 years ago. I had made it when my daughter got her PhD. I had made it last month when my son told me he was going to be a father. This cake was love translated into flour and eggs, and the patient work of hands that had kneaded and stirred and whisked for 46 years. But Barbara, who was 41 and had just moved into the neighborhood 6 months ago, who wore her blonde hair in a sleek ponytail and her yoga pants like a uniform of belonging, looked at me like I was something that had wandered in from a nursing home by mistake. The other women, all of them younger, all of them dressed in their athletic wear, even though this was supposed to be a casual potluck for the neighborhood association, they all turned to look at what I had brought. I could see it happening in slow motion. The way their eyes moved from my face to the dish to each other. The way their lips curved into these small, knowing smiles. The heat of humiliation started at my chest and spread upward, turning my neck red, making my cheeks burn. My hands were shaking now, actually shaking, and I had to set the cake down on the corner of the table before I dropped it. The woman next to Barbara, someone named Jessica or Jennifer. I could never keep them straight, because they all looked so similar with their highlighted hair and their perfect teeth and their expensive gym memberships. She leaned over and whispered something I wasn't supposed to hear but absolutely did hear. Probably tastes like dust and mothballs. They laughed. All of them laughed. Not loud, not cruel exactly, but this soft tittering that was somehow worse than if they had just pointed and cackled. It was the laugh of women who were so sure of their place in the world that they didn't even have to be mean about it. They could just be casually dismissive, and that dismissal carried the weight of everything our culture tells us about women and aging and value and worth. I wanted to leave. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to pick up my cake and walk out of that community center and never come back. But I had lived in this neighborhood for 17 years. I had been part of this neighborhood association since before half these women had even moved to the area. I had organized the holiday light contest and the spring plant exchange and the summer block parties. I had welcomed new families and brought meals when people were sick and collected donations for the local food bank. This was my community. These were supposed to be my neighbors, so I stayed. I walked over to an empty chair against the wall and I sat down. And I watched as more women arrived, most of them younger than me. All of them welcomed with enthusiasm while Barbara and her friends picked over the dishes on the table. Nobody touched my cake. Not a single person. They picked at the store-bought cookies and the pre-made spinach dip and the chips from Costco, but my cake, my grandmother's recipe that I had spent 3 hours making that morning, sat untouched in its corner spot like something toxic. The meeting started, and I tried to focus on what was being said. Something about the annual garage sale and new speed limit signs and a proposal to start a community garden, but all I could hear was that phrase echoing in my head. Old ladies never know how to cook anything decent anymore. When had I become an old lady? When had I crossed that invisible line from woman to old woman, from person with value to person who could be dismissed with a casual cruelty that nobody even bothered to hide? I thought about my age, really thought about it for the first time in a long time. 53. My mother had been 53 when I got married, and I had thought she was ancient then. Truly ancient. But she had been vibrant and energetic, and she had danced at my wedding until midnight. My grandmother had been 53 when she taught me to make this cake, and she had seemed timeless to me, ageless, just grandma who smelled like lemons and sugar and who always had flour on her apron. But somewhere along the way, 53 had become old. Somewhere in the last decade or two, the culture had shifted, and now women my age were supposed to be invisible, irrelevant, past our expiration date. The meeting dragged on for another 40 minutes. When it finally ended, I watched the younger women swarm the refreshment table again, filling their plates with everything except my cake. Barbara caught me watching and gave me this smile, this terrible smile that was almost sympathetic. Like she felt sorry for me, but also like she was glad she wasn't me, glad she still had time before she crossed over into whatever wasteland I now inhabited. I waited until everyone else had left. I packed up my untouched cake in its ceramic dish, the glaze still shining, perfect and beautiful and completely rejected. The community center was empty, except for me and the janitor who was setting up chairs in the corner. I walked out into the parking lot where the summer heat hit me like a wall, and I put the cake in my car, and I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and the windows up, and I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried since my divorce. Big, ugly sobs that made my whole body shake, that made my nose run and my eyes swell and my throat ache. I cried for that girl who had learned to bake at 7 years old. I cried for the woman who had won blue ribbons and baked birthday cakes and fed her family and her friends with so much love. I cried for all the hours I had spent in my kitchen thinking I was creating something valuable, something that mattered. And I cried because I realized that somewhere along the way, I had started to believe them. All of them. The culture, the media, the casual cruelty of younger women who looked at me and saw nothing but someone to dismiss. When I got home, I carried the cake inside, and I set it on my kitchen counter. My kitchen, which was small and outdated, with its white laminate countertops and its oak cabinets from the 1990s, but which had always felt like my space, my domain, the place where I was competent and skilled and valuable. I looked at the cake and I thought about throwing it away. I thought about smashing it into the garbage disposal and washing my hands of the whole humiliating experience. But I didn't. Instead, I cut myself a slice. I sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where I had fed my children breakfast every morning for 15 years, where I had helped with homework and paid bills and eaten thousands of meals, and I ate a piece of my grandmother's lemon cake. And you know what? It was perfect. The texture was exactly right, moist but not heavy, with that delicate crumb that comes from years of practice and understanding how ingredients work together. The lemon flavor was bright and clean, the glaze adding just the right amount of sweetness to balance the temps. It was, objectively, a beautiful cake. That night, something shifted inside me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like a switch flipping or a revelation descending from heaven. It was more like a door opening, just a crack, letting in a thin stream of light that illuminated something I hadn't been able to see before. These women, Barbara and her friends, they didn't know anything about cooking or baking or the value of something made with care and skill and decades of experience. They knew about buying things, about consuming things, about the performance of having the right yoga pants and the right protein shake and the right everything. But they didn't know about making. They didn't know about creating something from scratch, about the patience and the precision and the love that goes into real food. And if they were wrong about the cake, what else were they wrong about? I finished my slice and I cut another one. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a photo of it, a really good photo with the light from my kitchen window making the glaze shimmer, and I posted it on my mostly dormant Instagram account, with a simple caption about my grandmother's recipe. Within an hour, I had 23 likes and 7 comments, most of them from old friends I hadn't spoken to in months or years, all of them saying it looked beautiful, asking for the recipe, sharing their own memories of their grandmother's kitchens. That small validation, that tiny pushback against Barbara's casual cruelty. It was like oxygen to someone who had been slowly suffocating without realizing it. I stayed up late that night, later than I had stayed up in months, scrolling through those comments and thinking about what had happened at the community center, thinking about how I had felt, thinking about how I had let someone else's opinion of me, someone who didn't know me at all, who had no idea what I was capable of or what I had accomplished, or what I knew, thinking about how I had let that opinion cut me so deeply. The next morning, I woke up with an idea. It was a small idea, barely formed, but it was there. I had been baking for 46 years. I had recipes and skills and knowledge that these younger women, with their Instacart deliveries and their meal kits, and their reliance on restaurants and convenience, they had no idea about. And maybe, just maybe, there were other people out there who would value that, who would want to learn, who would understand that age and experience weren't liabilities but assets. One spent the morning researching. I learned about food blogs and YouTube channels and Instagram accounts dedicated to baking. I learned about women my age and older who were building communities online, sharing their knowledge, teaching younger generations the skills that seemed to be disappearing. I learned about the term silver economy and how older women were increasingly rejecting the notion that they should fade into invisibility after 50. By noon, I had made a decision. I was going to start a baking blog. Not just any baking blog, but one specifically focused on the recipes and techniques that had been passed down through generations. The kind of baking that required skill and patience and couldn't be rushed or shortcutted. I was going to call it what Grandma knew, and I was going to prove to myself, and to Barbara, and to anyone else who thought that being 53 made me irrelevant, that experience had value. But I had no idea what was coming next. I had no idea that this small act of defiance, this decision to refuse invisibility, would lead me down a path that would change everything about how I saw myself and my place in the world. I had no idea that Barbara's cruelty was just the beginning, just the first crack in a dam that was about to break wide open. 3 days after I launched What Grandma Knew, I had 47 followers. Most of them were friends from high school or college, people I hadn't spoken to in years who had somehow found my blog through the magical algorithms of social media. But 12 of them were complete strangers. 12 people I had never met who had stumbled across my first post. A detailed recipe for my grandmother's lemon cake with step-by-step photos and explanations of why each technique mattered. And they had decided it was worth following. 12 people doesn't sound like much, but to me, sitting at my kitchen table at 6:30 in the morning with my coffee getting cold while I stared at my laptop screen, 12 strangers felt like a miracle. 12 people who had looked at my content and hadn't seen an old lady who didn't know how to cook anything decent. They had seen someone with knowledge worth learning from. I posted my second recipe that morning, my mother's coffee cake with its thick cinnamon streusel topping. I wrote about how she used to make it every Sunday morning, how the smell would wake me up as a child, how I had learned to make the streusel just right so it was crunchy but not hard, sweet but not cloying. I included photos of the process, my hands working the butter into the flour and sugar, the way the batter looked before and after adding the sour cream, the golden brown perfection of the finished cake. By that evening, I had 63 followers, and I had my first comment from someone I didn't know. Her name was Patricia, she was 58, and she wrote that she had been trying to recreate her grandmother's coffee cake for 10 years and had never gotten it right until she found my recipe. She said she had cried when she tasted it because it brought back memories of Sunday mornings in her grandmother's kitchen. She said she had thought those memories were lost forever. I read that comment 5 times. Then I read it again. Then I cried, right there at my kitchen table with my laptop screen blurring through my tears. Because Patricia understood. She understood that these recipes weren't just instructions for combining ingredients. They were connections to the past, to the people we had loved, to the versions of ourselves that existed in warm kitchens, surrounded by the smell of baking and the sound of familiar voices. That same evening, I had to go to Target for laundry detergent and paper towels. The mundane necessities of life that don't stop just because you're having a personal revelation. I was standing in the checkout line, scrolling through my phone and watching my follower count tick up to 67, when I heard a familiar laugh behind me. I turned around and there was Barbara, her cart full of organic produce and expensive wine, and all the markers of someone who has disposable income and likes everyone to know it. She saw me and her face did this complicated thing where she clearly wanted to pretend she hadn't seen me, but it was too late for that, so she had to acknowledge me, but she didn't really want to. "Oh, hi." Her voice was flat, barely polite. "Hi, Barbara." I kept my voice neutral, pleasant even, because I had learned over the years that the best response to passive aggression was aggressive pleasantness. She glanced at my cart, which contained generic brand detergent and the cheapest paper towels and a frozen pizza because I hadn't felt like cooking dinner. I saw her eyes do the calculation, the quick assessment of value based on purchases, and I saw the small smile that meant she had found me wanting. Again. "How have you been?" she asked, and I could tell she didn't care at all, that this was just what you said to neighbors you couldn't quite ignore. Really good, actually. And the thing was, I meant it. For the first time in years, maybe since before my divorce, I actually meant it when someone asked how I was. "I started a food blog. It's going really well." Her eyebrows went up, and not in a good way. "A food blog? Isn't that market pretty saturated? I mean, everyone and their mother has a food blog these days." There it was. That casual dismissal again, that gentle crushing of anything that might make me feel good about myself. Everyone and their mother, the implication being that food blogs were common, basic, beneath notice. That what I was doing was just another middle-aged woman trying to be relevant and failing at it. "Maybe," I said, and I kept smiling because I wasn't going to let her see that it stung. "But mine has a specific focus. Traditional baking techniques, recipes passed down through generations. There's actually a lot of interest in that right now." Oh, she made this non-committal sound that somehow conveyed both disbelief and dismissal. "Well, good luck with that." She turned away, already pulling out her phone, already done with me. I paid for my items and walked out to my car, and I felt that familiar burn of humiliation starting in my chest again. But this time, something was different. This time, underneath the hurt, there was anger. Real anger, not just wounded pride. Because who was Barbara to dismiss what I was doing? Who was she to make me feel small for trying something, for creating something, for refusing to just fade away quietly like women my age were apparently supposed to do? I drove home with my hands tight on the steering wheel and my jaw clenched. And when I got inside, I didn't put away the groceries right away like I normally would. Instead, I sat down at my laptop and I wrote. I wrote about what it felt like to be years old and invisible. I wrote about the casual cruelty of younger women who looked at you and saw nothing but irrelevance. I wrote about the way our culture discards women after a certain age, how we're supposed to quietly disappear, how our knowledge and experience and skills are treated like they have no value. I wrote for 2 hours straight, barely stopping to breathe, and when I was done I had a blog post that was raw and honest and probably too personal, but I didn't care. I titled it, "When Did I Become Invisible?" and I hit publish before I could second-guess myself. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 12 hours, that post had been shared 230 times. My follower count jumped from 67 to 412, and the comments. Oh, the comments. Women my age and older, all of them sharing their own stories of invisibility and dismissal. Women who had been interrupted in meetings by younger colleagues. Women who had been ignored by salespeople in stores. Women who had watched their expertise and experience get overlooked in favor of younger, less qualified people. Women who had felt that same burn of humiliation when someone looked at them and saw nothing worth noticing. One woman, Margaret, who was 61, wrote about being pushed out of her job of 23 years because the new CEO wanted a younger, more dynamic team. Another woman, Linda, 55, wrote about her own daughter telling her she dressed too young for her age when she wore jeans and a nice blouse to a family dinner. Another woman, Susan, 57, wrote about her husband of 30 years leaving her for a woman barely older than their son, telling her that she had let herself go even though she looked almost exactly the same as when they got married, just older, just human, just real. I read every single comment. I responded to every single one. And with each story I read, I felt something building inside me. Not just anger. Though there was plenty of that. But also recognition. Community. The understanding that I wasn't alone in this. That what had happened at the neighborhood potluck wasn't just Barbara being rude. It was part of a larger pattern of how our culture treats aging women. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all those women and their stories. Thinking about my own story. Thinking about how we had all been taught to accept this treatment as normal, as just. The way things were, at 2 in the morning, I got up and went back to my laptop and I started researching. I learned about ageism and how it affects women differently than men. I learned that women over 50 are the fastest growing demographic of homeless people in America because they lose jobs and can't find new ones, because they get divorced and lose financial security, because the safety nets that exist aren't designed for them. I learned about the wage gap that gets worse as women age. About the way older women are systematically excluded from media representation. About studies showing that women become invisible to society around age 52. 52. I was 53. I had crossed that threshold. I was officially invisible. Except I wasn't, not anymore, because 412 people were following my blog. 412 people who wanted to hear what I had to say, who valued my knowledge, who saw me as someone worth paying attention to. It wasn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it was something. It was proof that I existed, that I mattered, that my experience had value. The next morning, I went to the community center. Not for a meeting, just to pay my annual neighborhood association dues. The same women from the potluck were there. Barbara and Jessica or Jennifer and a few others I recognized, and they were clustered around a table planning the summer block party. I paid my dues to the treasurer and turned to leave, but Barbara's voice stopped me. Actually, since you're here, we wanted to talk to you about the block party. Her tone was pleasant, professional, but there was something underneath it that made my skin prickle. I turned back. Okay, we're making some changes this year. Trying to attract more young families to the neighborhood, really building a sense of community with the newer residents. She smiled, and it was the same smile she had given me in Target. So we're looking for volunteers who reflect that energy, you understand. I stared at her. Are you telling me you don't want me to volunteer for the block party? Not exactly. We're just being strategic about who we have in visible positions. You could still help with setup or cleanup if you want. She said it so casually, like she was doing me a favor, like she was being generous by even offering me the scraps. The other women were watching now, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to smugly satisfied. I could see it happening, the same dynamic as the potluck, but more blatant this time. They were pushing me out. They were making it clear that I didn't belong in their neighborhood anymore. That I was too old, too irrelevant, too much of a reminder that they would all eventually end up where I was. Something snapped inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but definitively. Like a bone breaking cleanly, a fracture that would either heal stronger or never heal at all. No thank you. My voice was steady, calm. Even I don't think I'll be volunteering this year. In fact, I'm resigning from the neighborhood association effective immediately. Barbara's eyebrows shot up. That seems like an overreaction, does it? I kept my voice level, pleasant, that aggressive pleasantness that was becoming my armor. You just told me I'm too old to be in a visible position at a community event in the neighborhood where I've lived for 17 years. You dismissed my baking at the potluck. You've made it very clear that you don't value my contribution. So no, I don't think it's an overreaction. I think it's just accepting reality. I turned and walked out before any of them could respond. My heart was pounding and my hands were shaking and I felt dizzy with adrenaline. But I also felt something else. I felt powerful. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had some control over my own life, over how I let people treat me. When I got home, I wrote another blog post. This one was about community and belonging, about what it means when the places you've invested your time and energy make it clear you're no longer welcome. About the difference between aging and being aged out, between growing older and being pushed aside, about fighting back against invisibility, not with anger, but with presence. With refusing to disappear just because it would be more comfortable for everyone else. That post got shared 600 times, my follower count hit 973, and I got an email from a woman named Carol who ran a local bakery and had seen my blog through a friend. She wanted to know if I would be interested in teaching a baking class at her shop, focusing on traditional techniques and old-fashioned recipes. She said there was a growing interest in that kind of thing, that people were tired of boxed mixes and wanted to learn real skills. I stared at that email for a long time. Teaching a class felt huge, felt exposed, felt like stepping way outside my comfort zone. But it also felt right. It felt like the next logical step in whatever this journey was that I had started when I refused to throw away that lemon cake. I wrote back and said yes. We scheduled the first class for 3 weeks away, focusing on layer cakes and proper frosting techniques. Carol would handle the marketing, and I would develop the curriculum and teach. It would pay $200 for a 2-hour class, which wasn't a lot, but was more than I had made from my own skills and knowledge in years. That evening, my daughter called. We talked every week, usually just catching up on the mundane details of our lives, but this time she had seen my blog. Her voice was strange when she brought it up, careful in a way that made me nervous. "Mom, I saw your posts about the neighborhood association and everything." "Yeah." I tried to keep my voice neutral, not sure where this was going. "Are you okay? I mean, it seems like you're going through something." There was concern in her voice, but also something else. Something that sounded like worry that I was embarrassing myself. That I was having some kind of midlife crisis that would reflect badly on her. "I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm finally doing something for myself." "But Mom, some of those posts are pretty personal. Are you sure you want all that stuff online? I mean, what if people see it? What if it affects your job prospects or something?" Job prospects. I hadn't had a job in 6 years. Not since I got laid off from my administrative position when the company downsized and I couldn't find anything else because, apparently, 50 was too old to be hired but too young to retire. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said, "I'm not worried about that. This is important to me." She sighed, and I could picture her on the other end of the phone, probably shaking her head, probably thinking her mother was losing it. "Okay. I just don't want you to get hurt. Some people online can be really mean. Some people in real life can be really mean too," I said. "At least online I'm finding my people." We talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation felt strained, like we were speaking different languages. After we hung up, I felt that familiar ache of not being understood even by the people who were supposed to know you best, but I also felt determined. This was my path, my choice, my way of refusing to disappear. And if my own daughter didn't understand it, well, maybe that was okay. Maybe I didn't need everyone to understand. 2 weeks before my first baking class, I got a message on my blog from a woman named Diane. She was 56, lived 2 towns over, and she had read all my posts. She wanted to know if I would be interested in meeting for coffee. She said she had been going through something similar, that she felt invisible and dismissed and angry about it, and she wanted to talk to someone who understood. We met at a Starbucks halfway between our houses. Diane was tall and elegant with silver hair. She wore long and natural, and when she smiled at me from across the coffee shop, I felt an immediate connection, like seeing a reflection of myself in someone else's face. We talked for 3 hours straight, our coffee getting cold while we shared stories of dismissal and invisibility. of casual cruelty and systematic exclusion, of all the ways we had been made to feel like we didn't matter anymore. But we also talked about resistance, about the small ways we were fighting back, refusing to disappear. Diane had started a consulting business after being pushed out of her corporate job, and she was slowly building a client base of other older women who valued her experience. She told me about a network of women she had discovered online, all of them over 50, all of them pushing back against ageism in their own ways. "We should do something," Diane said, leaning forward with an intensity that made her eyes bright. "Not just individually, but together. There's power in numbers." "Like what?" I was intrigued but also cautious. I had just started to find my footing with the blog and the baking class. I wasn't sure I was ready for something bigger. "I don't know yet. But think about it. All these women, all this experience and skill and knowledge that's being wasted because society decided we're not valuable anymore. What if we created something that proved them wrong? What if we built something that showed exactly how valuable we are?" I thought about it on the drive home. I thought about all the women who had commented on my blog, all their stories of being dismissed and overlooked. I thought about Patricia, who cried over coffee cake, and Margaret, who lost her job, and Linda, whose daughter criticized her clothes, and Susan, whose husband left her. I thought about the collective years of experience and knowledge and skill that all those women represented, and how much of it was going to waste because no one valued it anymore. What if Diane was right? What if there was a way to take all that wasted potential and turn it into something powerful? That night, I started making a list. Skills that women my age had, experience we could offer, knowledge we could share. The list got long quickly. Cooking, baking, sewing, gardening, budgeting, project management, crisis management, conflict resolution, mentoring, teaching, organizing, planning. Decades of life experience translated into practical, valuable skills that the younger generation often lacked because they had grown up in a world of convenience and outsourcing and digital solutions to analog problems. I posted about it on my blog, asking my followers what skills they had, what they could teach, what they wished someone had taught them when they were younger. The responses flooded in. Women who could teach financial literacy and meal planning, and home repair, and time management and stress reduction, and 1,000 other practical skills that you don't learn in school but that make the difference between surviving and thriving. Within a week, I had a spreadsheet with 217 names and skills. 217 women who were ready to prove their value, who were tired of being invisible, who wanted to fight back against a culture that told them they were past their expiration date. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about proving to Barbara and the neighborhood association that I mattered. This was about all of us. This was about every woman who had been dismissed because of her age, every woman who had been made to feel invisible, every woman who had decades of knowledge and experience that was being wasted because no one bothered to listen. This was about starting a revolution. A quiet revolution, maybe, but a revolution nonetheless. And I was going to be right in the middle of it. But I had no idea what that would cost me. I had no idea that fighting back against invisibility would make me more visible than I ever wanted to be. I had no idea that some people don't like it when you refuse to disappear quietly. I had no idea what Barbara was planning, and I definitely had no idea that the real battle was just beginning. My first baking class was scheduled for a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I arrived at Carol's Bakery at 8:30, my arms full of ingredients and equipment, my stomach churning with nervous energy that felt like swallowing electricity. Carol met me at the door with a smile that was meant to be reassuring but only made me more aware of how much was riding on this going well. "We're sold out," she said, helping me carry things to the teaching kitchen in the back. All 12 spots filled within 48 hours of posting. I could have filled twice that many if we had the space. 12 people, 12 strangers who were going to pay $35 each to learn from me. 420 dollars that Carol and I would split after expenses. $210 that I would earn from my own knowledge and skills. Not from some corporate job that had decided I was too old, not from anyone's charity or pity, but from something I had built myself. The students started arriving at 9:45. They were all women, ranging from what looked like early 30s to late 60s. They came in talking and laughing, finding their stations, tying on the aprons that Carol had provided, and they looked at me with expectation, with interest, with the assumption that I had something valuable to teach them. Nobody looked at me like I was an old lady who didn't know anything. Nobody dismissed me before I even opened my mouth. I taught them how to make a proper layer cake from scratch, not from a box, not with shortcuts, but the real thing with real techniques that had been passed down through generations. I showed them how to cream butter and sugar properly, how to alternate dry and wet ingredients, how to test for doneness without overbaking. I taught them how to level layers, how to make a crumb coat, how to frost smoothly without getting crumbs in the icing. I shared the tricks my grandmother had taught me and the things I had learned through decades of trial and error. And they listened. They actually listened. They took notes and asked questions and practiced the techniques I was showing them. When the 2 hours were up and everyone had a finished cake to take home, they applauded. They actually applauded. Several of them asked when the next class would be. One woman, maybe 40 years old, told me she had been intimidated by baking her whole life, and this was the first time she felt like she could actually do it. Carol was beaming when I helped her clean up after everyone left. That was amazing. I already have people emailing asking about future classes. Would you be willing to do this monthly? Maybe even twice a month. I said yes. Before I could overthink it, yes to being valued. Yes to using my skills. Yes to refusing invisibility. I drove home feeling lighter than I had felt in years, maybe decades. The morning sun was bright and warm through my windshield, and I actually sang along to the radio, something I couldn't remember the last time I had done. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw my neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Chen, working in her garden. She waved and I waved back, and for a moment everything felt normal and good and full of possibility. Then I saw my front door. Or rather, I saw what someone had done to my front door. Someone had spray painted a word across it in dripping red letters. A single word that hit me like a physical blow. Bitter. I sat in my car staring at it, my hands frozen on the steering wheel, my breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The lightness I had felt just seconds ago evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, creeping dread that started in my stomach and spread outward until my fingers were numb and my vision was tunneling. Mrs. Chen had stopped gardening and was walking toward me, her face concerned. I saw them this morning, she called out as she got closer. Around 7 o'clock, I didn't see who it was, just a car that stopped in front of your house for a few minutes. I'm so sorry. I should have paid more attention. I got out of my car slowly, like I was moving through water. Up close, the word was even worse. The paint was still slightly tacky, relatively fresh. Someone had done this while I was teaching my class, while I was feeling good about myself, while I was daring to believe that maybe I could build something new. I'm calling the police, Mrs. Chen said, already pulling out her phone. The police came and took a report. They were professional and polite, and completely unhelpful. Vandalism, they said. Probably kids. Happens all the time. Without witnesses or security footage, there wasn't much they could do. They gave me a case number, and told me I could file a claim with my homeowner's insurance for the cost of repainting the door. After they left, I stood in my living room staring at that word through my front window. Bitter. It was such a specific word, such a calculated cruelty. Kids doing random vandalism would have spray painted something crude, something meaningless. This was targeted. This was personal. This was someone who knew about my blog, about my posts, about my refusal to quietly disappear. This was someone who wanted to punish me for speaking up. I thought about Barbara and her friends, about the way they had dismissed me at the potluck and pushed me out of the neighborhood association. I thought about how quickly my blog had grown, how visible I had become in a way that maybe made some people uncomfortable. I thought about my post about invisibility, about ageism, about refusing to be quiet and grateful for whatever scraps younger women decided to throw my way, and I thought about how someone had read all that and decided the appropriate response was to vandalize my home, to mark me publicly as bitter, to try to shame me back into silence. I spent the rest of Saturday afternoon painting over the word. Mrs. Chen came over with her husband, and they helped me. The three of us working in silence mostly, just the sound of brushes against wood and the occasional car passing by. The paint didn't quite match, so my front door ended up looking patchy and odd. But at least the word was covered. At least people driving by wouldn't see it anymore. That night, I almost didn't write about it on my blog. I sat at my laptop for an hour, cursor blinking in an empty text box, debating whether sharing this would make things worse or better. But then I thought about all the women who read my posts, all the women who had shared their own stories of being dismissed and diminished. If I stayed silent about this, if I let whoever did this win by scaring me into quiet, what message did that send? So I wrote about it. I wrote about coming home from teaching my first baking class, about the joy of being valued for my knowledge and skills, about finding my front door vandalized with that single, calculated word. I wrote about the fear it created, but also about the anger. I wrote about how this was exactly what happens when women refuse to be invisible. When we push back against the systems and people that try to erase us, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, I had hundreds of comments. Women sharing their own stories of retaliation for speaking up. Women who had been harassed, threatened, shunned, punished for refusing to be quiet and grateful. Women who understood exactly what that word on my door represented, an attempt to dismiss valid anger as bitter complaining, to pathologize righteous fury as personal failing. But there were also offers of support. Women who lived nearby offering to install security cameras, to patrol my street, to make sure I wasn't alone. Diane called me at 11 o'clock that night, her voice fierce with protective anger. This is exactly why we need to organize. This is exactly why we can't do this alone. She was right. I knew she was right. But I was also scared in a way I hadn't been before. Scared that speaking up had made me a target. Scared that whoever had done this might escalate. Scared that maybe I was in over my head, that maybe I should just delete the blog and go back to being invisible and safe. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to every sound, every car that passed, every creak of my house settling. And I thought about that word, bitter. I thought about how it's used almost exclusively against women. How it's designed to dismiss legitimate grievances by reframing them as personal flaws. You're not experiencing discrimination. You're just bitter. You're not calling out injustice. You're just bitter. You're not demanding respect. You're just bitter. It was the same tactic as calling women emotional, or hysterical, or sensitive. Take valid concerns and reframe them as character defects. Make the problem about us instead of about the systems and people that hurt us. By the time the sun came up Sunday morning, I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. I spent Sunday documenting everything. I took photos of my patchy door, screenshots of my blog posts, copies of the police report. I started a file, organized and methodical, because if this was going to escalate, I wanted to be prepared. I wanted evidence. I wanted proof that this wasn't in my head, that I wasn't overreacting, that I wasn't just bitter. Monday morning, I got a call from Carol at the bakery. Her voice was strange, tight, and uncomfortable in a way that made my stomach drop. "I need to talk to you about the baking classes," she said. I knew what was coming before she said it. I could hear it in her tone, in the careful way she was choosing her words. I got some complaints over the weekend. People saying they saw your blog, that they're uncomfortable with the political nature of your posts. They're saying they don't want to support a business that platforms someone who's divisive, political. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I'm writing about ageism and discrimination. That's not political, it's reality. I know, and personally, I agree with you, but I have a business to run, and I can't afford to alienate customers. I'm sorry, but I think we need to put the classes on hold for a while. Put on hold. The universal euphemism for canceled forever. Did Barbara contact you? I asked. Or any of her friends from the neighborhood association? There was a long pause. I don't know who contacted me. I got several emails and phone calls from people saying they wouldn't shop here anymore if I continued to work with you. I'm sorry, I really am. You're a great teacher, and the class was wonderful, but I can't take that financial hit. We ended the call, and I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. They were systematically cutting off every avenue I had for using my skills, for earning money, for building something. First the neighborhood association, then my house, now the baking classes. This wasn't random, this was coordinated, this was intentional. I opened my laptop and I looked at my blog stats. I was up to 3,200 followers now. 3,200 people who were reading my posts, engaging with my content, sharing their own stories. That was power. That was visibility. That was exactly what made me dangerous to people like Barbara, who wanted women my age to stay quiet and invisible and grateful. And that's when I realized something. I could back down, delete the blog, apologize, try to fade back into invisibility. Or I could double down. I could refuse to be intimidated. I could fight back harder than they were fighting me. I chose to fight. I wrote a new post. This one was about retaliation and intimidation, about what happens when you dare to speak truth about ageism and discrimination. I detailed everything. The vandalism, the canceled classes, the orchestrated campaign to silence me. I didn't name Barbara specifically because I couldn't prove it was her. But I described the pattern clearly enough that anyone paying attention would understand what was happening. And then I did something that scared me even more than the vandalism had. I started a GoFundMe. Not for myself, though God knows I needed the money, but for something bigger. I proposed creating a website and organization specifically for women over 50 who were facing ageism and discrimination. A place to share resources, legal information, support networks. A place to connect women who had skills and experience with opportunities to use them. A place to fight back collectively instead of individually. I called it the Silver Coalition, and I set a modest goal of $5,000 to get started. Within 24 hours, we had raised $12,000. Within 48 hours, it was $23,000. Women from all over the country contributing $10, $20, $50. Women who had read my posts and saw themselves in my story, who were tired of being invisible, who wanted to be part of something bigger than their individual struggles. Diane volunteered to help me manage it. She had experience with nonprofits from her corporate days, and she knew how to set up the legal structure, how to handle finances, how to build something sustainable. 2 other women from my blog also volunteered. Patricia, the woman who had cried over the coffee cake recipe, and a woman named Joyce, who was 62 and had been a lawyer before being pushed into early retirement. The 4 of us met at my house on a Wednesday evening. We sat around my kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten that perfect piece of lemon cake just weeks ago, and we planned. We talked about what resources women needed most. We discussed legal strategies for fighting age discrimination. We mapped out a website structure and a social media presence. We dreamed bigger than any of us had allowed ourselves to dream in years. We should have a physical presence too, Joyce said. Not just online. Somewhere women can come for actual help, actual support, like an office. I tried to imagine how we could afford that, more like a community center. A place for classes and workshops and meetings, a place where women can learn skills and teach skills and build networks. Diane's eyes were bright with the same intensity I had seen at Starbucks. We could use some of the GoFundMe money for a down payment on rent. It felt huge. It felt impossible. It felt terrifying and exciting in equal measure. Let's do it, I said. That Saturday, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, an actual physical letter on expensive stationery from a law firm I had never heard of. My hands were shaking as I opened it because I just knew it wasn't going to be good news. I was right. The letter informed me that I was being sued for defamation by an unnamed plaintiff. It claimed that my blog posts contained false and damaging statements about specific individuals, that I had caused reputational and financial harm, that I needed to cease and desist immediately or face legal action, including monetary damages. I read it 3 times, each time feeling more sick to my stomach. They were suing me. Someone was actually suing me for writing about my own experiences, for speaking my own truth. I called Joyce immediately. She had me read the letter to her over the phone, and I could hear her typing in the background, taking notes. "This is a slap suit," she said when I finished. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into silence. The person filing probably knows they don't have a real case, but they're banking on you not having the resources to fight back. Can they do that? Can they just sue me for talking about my life? They can file the suit. Whether they can win is another question entirely. But defending yourself, even against a frivolous suit, costs money and time and emotional energy. That's the whole point, to exhaust you into giving up." I thought about the GoFundMe money. I thought about the Silver Coalition that we were trying to build. I thought about the 3,200 women following my blog, all of them watching to see what I would do when things got hard. "I'm not giving up," I said. "I'm not deleting the blog. I'm not backing down." "Good," Joyce said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Because I'm going to represent you, pro bono, and I'm going to make whoever filed this regret it." That evening, I posted about the lawsuit on my blog. I explained what a slap suit was, how it was being used to try to silence me, how this was exactly what happened when women refused to be quiet about discrimination and injustice. I didn't back down. I didn't apologize. I didn't soften my message to try to appease whoever was coming after me. The response was explosive. My follower count jumped to 7,000. The GoFundMe for the Silver Coalition hit $50,000. Women started organizing their own local chapters, meeting in coffee shops and community centers, building networks of support and resistance. Journalists started reaching out, wanting to interview me for articles about ageism and women's rights. I was no longer invisible. I was very, very visible. And that visibility was both power and target, both weapon and vulnerability. But I wasn't alone anymore. I had Diane and Patricia and Joyce. I had 7,000 women following my journey. I had $50,000 to build something meaningful. I had proof that my experience mattered, that my voice had value, that my refusal to disappear was resonating with thousands of women. Who felt the same way? Barbara and whoever else was trying to silence me had made a critical miscalculation. They thought attacking me would scare me into quiet. Instead, they had shown everyone exactly why organizations like the Silver Coalition were necessary. They had proven my point better than I ever could have on my own. But I also knew this was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The lawsuit was pending. The vandalism could escalate. The campaign of intimidation could get worse before it got better. I stood at my kitchen window that night, looking out at the dark street, thinking about everything that had happened in just a few weeks, from that devastating moment at the potluck, to building a movement that was spreading across the country, from feeling invisible and worthless, to being sued for being too visible, too vocal, too unwilling to disappear. And I thought about what came next, about the fight ahead, about the women counting on me not to give up, about proving that we mattered, that our voices had power, that our experience had value no matter what anyone else said. I thought about that word painted on my door, bitter, and I smiled. Because maybe I was bitter. Maybe anger at injustice was exactly what the situation called for. Maybe refusing to be sweet and quiet and invisible was exactly the revolution we needed. Let them call me bitter. I was just getting started. The lawsuit turned out to be filed by Barbara. Joyce discovered it through legal channels 3 days after I received the threatening letter, and when she called to tell me, I wasn't even surprised. Of course it was Barbara. Of course the woman who had dismissed my baking and pushed me out of the neighborhood association and probably vandalized my door, was now trying to use the legal system to silence me. She's claiming you defamed her in your blog posts, Joyce explained. Says she's identifiable even though you never used her name, and that your posts have damaged her reputation in the community. Have they? I asked, genuinely curious. Actually, yes. Apparently several people have connected the dots and stopped speaking to her. Someone posted screenshots of your blog in the Neighborhood Association Facebook group, and there's been quite the discussion. She's not coming out looking good. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt weary. This was going to drag on for months, maybe years. Legal battles were expensive and exhausting even with Joyce representing me pro bono. And Barbara had money, real money from her tech executive husband. The kind of money that could sustain a lawsuit just to make a point. But the Silver Coalition was growing faster than any of us had anticipated. Within 2 weeks of launching, we had rented a small storefront space in a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We used the GoFundMe money to furnish it with donated tables and chairs, to set up a small kitchen area for teaching cooking classes, to create a resource library with legal information and job listings and support group schedules. Our opening day was on a Saturday morning in late July. We expected maybe 20 or 30 people. More than 200 women showed up. They came from all over the state, some driving 2 or 3 hours to be there. Women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, women who had been pushed out of jobs, pushed out of communities, pushed out of visibility. Women who were angry and scared and tired and determined. We ran out of chairs. We ran out of coffee. We ran out of the handouts we had printed. But nobody left. They stood in the back, sat on the floor, crowded around the doorway. They shared their stories. They cried. They laughed. They exchanged phone numbers and email addresses. They organized themselves into committees. Legal support, job networking, skill sharing, political advocacy. I stood in the middle of it all, watching this community build itself, and I felt something shift inside my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't even just about fighting Barbara, or winning the lawsuit, or proving that women over 50 had value. This was about creating something genuinely new, something that could outlast any individual battle. Diane pulled me aside during a break in the chaos. We need to talk about next steps. This is bigger than we planned for. We need real infrastructure, real funding, maybe even paid staff. How? The GoFundMe was running low after rent and furnishings, grants, fundraising events, maybe even membership dues on a sliding scale. There are foundations that fund this kind of work. She paused, and I think you need to go public. Really public. Tell your full story on a bigger platform. That terrified me more than the lawsuit did. Going public meant exposing myself completely, meant opening myself up to scrutiny and criticism from more than just Barbara and her friends. It meant becoming the face of something much larger than my personal grievances. But I thought about the 200 women in our small storefront space. I thought about the 7,000 following my blog. I thought about all the women who hadn't found us yet but who needed to know they weren't alone. That there were others fighting back, that invisibility wasn't inevitable. Okay, I said. Let's do it. Within a week, I was being interviewed by a journalist from a major national newspaper. She came to the Silver Coalition, talked to dozens of women, documented our stories. The article came out 3 weeks later with the headline, "The Gray Rebellion: How Older Women Are Fighting Back Against Ageism." My face was on the cover of the features section. My full name, my age, my story about the lemon cake and the neighborhood association, and the lawsuit. Everything exposed, everything public. The response was overwhelming. The article got picked up by other outlets. I was invited to appear on morning talk shows and podcasts. The Silver Coalition's membership exploded to over 3,000 women across 15 states. We were featured in think pieces about demographic shifts and social movements, and the power of women organizing. And Barbara's lawsuits started falling apart. Turns out, when you sue someone for defamation and it becomes national news, people pay attention to whether the claims are actually true. Other women from the neighborhood came forward with their own stories of Barbara's behavior, her pattern of dismissing and excluding older women, her comments about age and appearance. The neighborhood association had to address it officially, and several members resigned in protest of how the situation had been handled. Joyce filed a motion to dismiss based on anti-SLAPP statutes, arguing that my blog posts were protected speech on matters of public concern. The judge agreed. The case was thrown out, and Barbara was ordered to pay my legal fees. I should have felt triumphant. We won. I won. The woman who had tried to silence me was defeated, publicly humiliated, forced to acknowledge that she couldn't bully me into invisibility. But I felt empty, exhausted, like I had run a marathon only to discover there was another marathon waiting at the finish line, because the work wasn't done. The Silver Coalition needed consistent leadership and funding. Women were reaching out daily with stories of discrimination and asking for help. We had built something powerful, but sustaining it required energy and resources I wasn't sure we had. And personally, I was tired. Tired of being angry all the time. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the public face of a movement when sometimes I just wanted to bake a cake in my kitchen and not think about ageism and discrimination and lawsuits. One evening, about 6 months after that devastating potluck, I sat in my kitchen with just Diane. The others had gone home. The Silver Coalition office was closed for the night. It was just the two of us, and cups of tea and the quiet that comes after sustained chaos. "Are you okay?" Diane asked, and it was the first time in months that anyone had asked me that question, and actually waited for a real answer. "I don't know," I said, honestly. "I'm proud of what we built. I'm grateful for all of it. But I'm also exhausted in a way I've never been exhausted before. You can step back, you know? We have other people who can take leadership roles. You don't have to be the face of everything." I thought about that. About stepping back into relative anonymity, letting others carry the torch I had lit. Part of me desperately wanted that, but another part of me knew that my visibility mattered. That my willingness to put my name and face on this movement gave other women permission to do the same. "Not yet," I said. "Maybe someday, but not yet." 3 months later, on a cold October evening, I walked into the community center for the neighborhood association's annual meeting. I hadn't been there since the day I resigned, since the day Barbara told me I was too old to be visible at community events. The room went quiet when I entered. Everyone knew who I was now. Everyone had seen the articles and the interviews. Everyone knew about the lawsuit and how it ended. Barbara was there, sitting in the back row, her face carefully neutral. We made eye contact for just a second, and I saw something in her expression that might have been regret, or might have been residual anger, or might have been nothing at all. I took a seat near the front. The meeting proceeded normally. Budget discussions, upcoming events, neighborhood concerns, and then, during open comments, I stood up. "I'd like to propose that the neighborhood association adopt an explicit anti-discrimination policy," I said, "including protections based on age. I'd also like to volunteer to help draft it, if the board is interested." There was a long silence. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Within seconds, most of the room was applauding. Not everyone. Barbara and a few others sat stone-faced. But enough people that I knew something had shifted, that the conversation had changed. The board accepted my proposal. 2 months later, the policy was adopted. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was proof that speaking up mattered, that fighting back created change, even if that change came slowly and imperfectly. I started teaching baking classes again, This time, at the Silver Coalition space, I wrote a cookbook featuring recipes from members, all the traditional techniques and family recipes that were at risk of being lost. The proceeds went to funding the organization. And slowly, carefully, I started to reclaim joy. Not just anger and fighting and resistance, but actual joy. The pleasure of teaching someone to make proper buttercream. The satisfaction of watching women find jobs through our networking group. The warmth of community that came from building something together. I was 54 now. Still invisible to some people, but hyper-visible to others. Still fighting battles, but choosing them more carefully. Still angry about injustice, but learning to balance that anger with hope and action and the small moments of beauty that make life worth living. Barbara moved away 6 months after the lawsuit ended. I heard she and her husband bought a house in a different neighborhood, a fresh start away from the scandal. I felt nothing when I heard that, not vindication, not satisfaction, just a distant acknowledgement that some stories end not with resolution, but with people simply moving on. The Silver Coalition thrived. We expanded to 23 states. We helped hundreds of women fight age discrimination in the workplace. We created support networks and skill-sharing programs and advocacy campaigns. We became something real and lasting and powerful. And I learned that revolution doesn't always look like dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it looks like refusing to be quiet. Sometimes it looks like baking a cake and insisting it has value. Sometimes it looks like building community with other women who refuse to disappear. Sometimes revolution looks like living fully and visibly and unapologetically, exactly as you are, no matter who tries to paint you as bitter. 2 years after that devastating potluck, I stood in front of 300 women at the Silver Coalition's first national conference. The venue was a hotel ballroom in Chicago, nothing fancy but respectable. With round tables covered in white cloths, and a stage with actual lighting and microphones. We had come so far from that cramped storefront between the dry cleaner and the sandwich shop. I looked out at the sea of faces, women ranging from their late 40s to their early 80s. Women who had traveled from across the country to be here, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, uncomplicated pride. Not pride in myself specifically, but pride in what we had built together, in the collective refusal to disappear that had brought us all to this moment. When I walked into a neighborhood potluck carrying my grandmother's lemon cake, I began, my voice steady through the microphone, and someone called me an old lady who didn't know how to cook anything decent. I thought it was just about me. I thought I was the problem. That I was too sensitive, too old, too past my prime to matter anymore. The room was silent, attentive in the way that comes from shared recognition. But it wasn't about me. It was never just about me. It was about a culture that systematically devalues women as we age, that treats our experience as irrelevant and our presence as embarrassing. It was about ageism so deeply embedded in our society that even we don't always recognize it for what it is. I paused, taking a sip of water, looking at Diane in the front row. She gave me an encouraging nod. The Silver Coalition now has over 12,000 members across 38 states. We've helped 473 women file age discrimination complaints with the EEOC. We've connected 2,300 women with employment opportunities. We've taught over 5,000 people traditional skills through our workshops and classes. We've created support networks, legal resources, advocacy campaigns, and most importantly, we've created community. The applause was thunderous. I waited for it to die down before continuing. But numbers don't tell the whole story. The real story is in each individual woman who found the courage to speak up, to refuse invisibility, to insist that her life and experience and knowledge have value. The real story is you. I shared updates about our legal victories, our expansion plans, our new partnerships with aging advocacy organizations and women's rights groups. I talked about the cookbook that had sold 14,000 copies and funded our operations for the next year, I discussed our plans to launch a mentorship program connecting older women with younger women who wanted to learn traditional skills and benefit from decades of life experience. And then I talked about something more personal. I need to be honest with you about something, I said, my voice softening. This work is hard. Fighting against ageism, against a culture that wants us to disappear quietly. It's exhausting. There have been days when I wanted to quit, when the cost seemed too high. When I wondered if it was worth it, I saw heads nodding throughout the room. They understood. But then I remember why we started this. I remember that woman who vandalized my door, who tried to silence me by making me feel bitter and wrong for being angry about injustice. I remember Barbara and the lawsuit and all the ways people tried to push me back into invisibility. And I remember that every time we speak up, every time we refuse to be dismissed, we make it easier for the next woman to do the same. The conference continued for 2 more days. We had workshops on legal rights, on starting small businesses, on financial planning for older women, on healthcare advocacy, on using social media to build community. We had panels featuring members who had successfully fought discrimination cases, who had started second careers after 50, who had built thriving businesses based on traditional skills. On the final evening, we had a celebration dinner. The hotel staff brought out a massive cake, and when I saw it, I laughed so hard I almost cried. It was a perfect replica of my grandmother's lemon cake, scaled up to feed 300 people. Diane had arranged it as a surprise, working with the hotel pastry chef to recreate the recipe I had shared in that very first blog post. To the cake that started a revolution, Diane said, raising her glass. To refusing to be invisible, Patricia added. To bitterness, Joyce said with a wicked grin, and everyone laughed because we had reclaimed that word, turned it from an insult into a badge of honor. We ate cake and shared stories and made plans for the future. Women exchanged contact information and formed regional organizing committees and plotted new strategies for fighting ageism in their communities. The energy in that room was electric, hopeful, powerful. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I checked my email and found a message that made me pause. It was from Barbara. I almost deleted it without reading. Almost, but curiosity got the better of me. The email was short. She said she had seen coverage of the conference, that she wanted me to know she was sorry for how she had treated me, that she had been dealing with her own fears about aging and had taken them out on me. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but that she wanted me to know the Silver Coalition was doing important work. I read it 3 times. I felt ... complicated. Not forgiveness exactly, but something softer than the anger I had carried for so long. Barbara's cruelty had catalyzed something important, had pushed me toward building something meaningful. That didn't excuse what she had done, but it did contextualize it differently. I wrote back a brief response. Thank you for the apology. I hope you found your own path forward. I didn't need more than that. This wasn't about reconciliation or closure or becoming friends. It was about acknowledging that people are complicated, that hurt people, and that sometimes the best response is simply to move on. The next morning, I flew home. My house looked different than it had 2 years ago. The door had been properly repainted, matching now. I had installed security cameras after the vandalism. But more than the physical changes, the house felt different because I felt different. It was no longer a place of hiding and hurt, but a home base for a life that had expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. My daughter called that evening. Our relationship had improved slowly over the past 2 years as she began to understand what I was building, what the Silver Coalition meant not just to me but to thousands of women. She had even attended one of our regional events with me, listening to women's stories, beginning to see the patterns of discrimination that she would someday face herself. Mom, I saw the photos from the conference. It looked amazing. It really was. I'm proud of you, she said, and her voice caught slightly. I know I didn't get it at first. I thought you were overreacting, making things bigger than they needed to be. But I was wrong. What you've built, What you're doing, it matters. We talked for over an hour, really talked, the way we hadn't since before my divorce. She told me about her own experiences with subtle age bias at work, the ways she was starting to notice how women in their 40s were treated differently than younger women. She asked my advice, actually asked for it, and listened to the answer. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I had eaten that first perfect slice of lemon cake and decided not to throw it away. The same table where Diane and I had planned the Silver Coalition. The same table where I had cried and fought and slowly, painfully, rebuilt myself into someone who refused invisibility. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a blog post this time, but something different. A memoir, maybe. Or at least the beginning of one. The story of how a casual cruelty at a neighborhood potluck had sparked a movement. How personal hurt had transformed into collective action. How one woman's refusal to be silent had created space for thousands of women to speak. I wrote about the cost and the rewards, the fear and the triumph, the exhaustion and the joy. I wrote about learning that revolution doesn't require perfection, just persistence. That speaking up doesn't mean you always have to be loud. Just that you refuse to be silenced. That aging isn't about losing value. It's about accumulating wisdom and experience, and the hard-won knowledge of who you are and what you refuse to accept. I wrote until the sun came up, until my tea was cold and my fingers were cramping and my back ached from sitting too long. And when I finally stopped, I looked at what I had created and felt satisfied in a way I hadn't felt since I was young, since before the world taught me to doubt myself, since before I learned to make myself small and quiet and invisible. I was 56 years old. I had gray hair that I no longer colored, and wrinkles that I no longer tried to hide. I had a movement that bore my fingerprints and thousands of women who knew my name. I had purpose and community and the bone-deep knowledge that my life mattered, that my experience had value, that my voice deserved to be heard. And I had a recipe for lemon cake that could change lives. Sometimes revolution starts in the kitchen. Sometimes it starts with refusing to throw away something beautiful, just because someone else couldn't see its value. Sometimes it starts with one woman deciding that being called bitter is better than being silent. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very stubborn and very willing to fight for it, that revolution changes not just your own life but the lives of thousands of others who were waiting for someone to show them that refusing invisibility was possible. I saved my document and closed my laptop. Outside my window, the neighborhood was waking up, people heading to work, children waiting for school buses, the ordinary rhythms of ordinary lives. I was part of that ordinariness now, but I was also part of something extraordinary. I was a woman who refused to disappear, and I wasn't alone anymore. That made all the difference.